Hello, and welcome to our final interview for the Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, even though we're one day out of the month. But who cares? It should be Men's Mental Health Awareness all the time. And that's what we're doing today. My name is Chrissy Hodges. I am the executive director and founder of OCD Game Changers. Excited to be here today to talk to our guest. But first, I'm going to have John introduce himself as my co host of this series. Go ahead, John.
Yep, I'm John. Thank you, Chrissy, for letting us do this. It's been a fun month, so I'm excited to wrap it up. Um, and today we're going to be talking about OCD and faith and just kind of touching on topics with that. And we have Justin with us. So, Justin, if you want to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and you have a new book, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about that, that'd be cool.
Sure. Yeah. Justin Hughes. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Dallas, Texas. Just joyed to be here. Chrissy and I go back a long ways. So it's really special to just jump on as friends and also fellow advocates in this space. And then, John, getting to know you today, too. It's really neat. This just it keeps my heart beating for this work when I get to just talk to others. So yeah, I specialize in OCD and anxiety disorders. But I mean, OCD is the main love that I have. It's fun to work with some other things sometimes, but I'm like 95% of my practice is working with OCD. I love the people. I love the work. It's so enriching, rewarding. And yes, I am an author. So my book is currently being edited as we speak. It's with Routledge, and we're hoping for a summer 2026 release, The Christian's Guide to Overcoming OCD, and just want it to be a manual, a reference to go to for especially those who suffer, but also clinicians to say, hey, step by step, first of all, treatment is effective, treatment works. And here's how we generally do it. There's always, extra things that you can add on or do or whatever, but these are the basics, the gold standard approaches. And then also how a person can grow their faith at the same time, because one of the most common questions that comes up is, can I do this and be faithful? Is this going to ask me to do things that are actually against what I should be doing, what I believe in, what I know to be true, what I hope to be true? Fill in the blank. And the reality is no, nor is OCD a problem of faith distinctively. So I just want to keep beating that drum. And I was slow to move into that myself, having my own questions and concerns and doubts and fears and whatnot. But it's a really special time for me to be able to present this to the world. So thanks for asking about it.
Cool. Thank you very much. So we're gonna get started, and as I told you earlier today, like myself, I'm spiritual, but I don't have like a set religion, even though I grew up in a Catholic family and went to the Catholic university for law school. And somewhere along the way, I just found that I believed more spirit along the lines of more spiritual leaning. But just kind of from my knowledge of like the Catholic teachings, and I'm sure it's the same throughout all different types of religion. Uh, the man is kind of looked at as like a very stoic figure, somebody who kind of has their shit together and they're able to be this like strong idol for communities, right? Um, how would you, I guess, how would you address somebody like a if a man came to you with their diagnosis of OCD and feel as if, they're a failure or they're not living up to this ideal that they had from their teachings? How would you kind of navigate that?
Mm. Yeah, it's great to think about how a lot of those barriers can exist and stigma can exist for any person walking into therapy, and it can follow some unique nuances for men, for people in our culture in the West. There's all sorts of different dynamics, and this can be different throughout the world as well, an emphasis one way or the other. And so I do think a lot of times for men, there is a pretty consistent across culture stigma against sharing inner thought life, inner feelings, whatever it's called. Maybe it's put down or emphasized as weak or not in control. or whatever else. And so, right off the bat, especially as a therapist, to be aware of how these things can present and how that looks like in unique cultures in different backgrounds is important. And so, as you ask it, it reminds me of something that I would almost say that I had to learn early on because if I wasn't able to walk with folks and break through some of the stigma, we wouldn't get much further than a session or two or three or go deep enough, especially when we're talking about something like OCD that can invade every space of life. So right off the bat, I think it's so crucial to emphasize something that I think is important for men's mental health, the concept of strength. And I use an example that a lot of veterans that I've worked with have given me that there was only one person. I'd actually been on a veterans unit for a hospital that I'd worked at one point, and it was really interesting when I'd come across people that had gone through tremendous physical pain, loss, suffering, trauma, etc. A lot of times the emotional was presented almost always, except in one instance. I had one person say, nah, the physical pain that I've experienced has been way worse than the mental. But every other instance that I've heard of in asking people even directly, like, how does this compare with any physical suffering that you've gone through? Again and again and again and again, people say this is way worse. And when there's that baseline of a person that has tremendous physical suffering and sometimes other ailments or illnesses, it doesn't have to be necessarily a physical injury, that on the mental and emotional side of things, it can be so incredibly painful. And so I think one of the things that we can highlight in a positive way is strength and the strength it takes to sit down and say, I'm struggling. I'm having a hard time. Here are my emotions with this. And so to even really reframe the thought of strength, I think is very crucial and something that I've learned along the way. Early on, just kind of maybe some of the pragmatism of it, but now from the standpoint of very much valuing that as a very key component of strength, and particularly for men to think about what does it look like to be strong.
What does that look like to reframe the word or the strength in general?
Mm.
What's helpful?
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of times I think it's even just having insecurities. And so sometimes it's normalizing that to say, oh yeah, I've met with 12 people this week that reflect a similar thing. So let's just take a theme in OCD of harm OCD. So having these taboo thoughts about what if I do something bad? What if I do something wrong to harm somebody else? Or what if I want to harm somebody else? I think being able to slow down enough to get with what feels like insecurity and the lack of confidence of I don't even know if I can trust myself. I feel out of control. I feel out of my mind, etc. To say, wow, what was that like to come? I mean, very early on in a first session, I'll often ask, like, what is that like to bring that up, to share that. Now, some people may already have the words to use. Sometimes I do pull out something like a feelings wheel. um, and then everybody's stylistically different, but often like I didn't want to share it. Yeah, these things are difficult to vocalize, to verbalize. That's really big, and that's really strength in my book. So I think, calling out those moments that feel like insecurity, but are actually strength in very real, tangible ways with specific examples. Like, wow, you just shared something that you've never shared with anybody, or only maybe a couple of people. That's one of the contextual ways that I'll do that.
I just wanted to say really quick, sorry, John, you're probably
Yeah,
jumping a bit to ask another.
no, you're
It's interesting because what you're doing is pointing out, which of course I believe too, that vulnerability is strength. But men in general are
Vulnerability is
not
strength.
taught or not
Hmm.
taught that vulnerability is strength. It's the
Yeah,
opposite
yeah,
of having to
yeah.
hide the vulnerability and
Yeah.
have that big persona of
Hmm.
strength. But it is interesting of how like
Hmm.
we, it's almost how, of course I'm not a man, so I can't really talk about this, but like, but having to unlearn that and then have this safe space to be able to be vulnerable,
Mhm.
to experience that kind of
Mhm.
strength.
That's right. Yeah, and what a great simple way to put it is vulnerability is strength.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is a tough thing to unlearn because I think I experienced it
Mhm.
myself in just sharing my story, sharing that I had, mental
Mhm.
health difficult struggles. Um, you know, you don't think people are going to be open to hearing about it, and you
Mhm.
don't think that you're going to not be looked at as like some sort of monster or some sort of like,
Mhm.
you know, whatever society wants to put associate mental health with. But it really took some time to like kind of just like accept like, okay, like this is normal. And as I started talking with friends about it, you start seeing that acceptance. And I can only imagine that, places of worship would be just as open, even though there is that fear of when taboo thoughts might go against whatever teachings.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
I know for myself, at least, I explained this to you a little bit earlier, but like with harm, one of the things that kind of triggered that thought was watching Amityville Horror, the whole
Mhm.
possession aspect
Mhm.
behind it, even though I wasn't, particularly religious at the time, like this demonic, and maybe it's just from my growing up, going to church and whatnot, but like this idea of like demonic possession and losing control.
Mhm.
Um, but then also as a kid, I remember, where I would like maybe curse God and then like have this
Mhm.
fear that like, something bad's gonna happen to me and like,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that was a big fear. So when taboo thoughts attach onto religious ideas, like,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you've probably seen multiple clients with that. Like, what advice would you have to navigate that and like separate yourself from, something that you believe in and love, faith versus the thought itself?
Mm. Yeah, well, and I think starting on that topic of the vulnerability is strength, it takes courage. You just do a a one question test on that. Was it difficult to come to the place to verbalize, to bring that up, right? And that takes strength, that takes courage to be able to do that. And so good for you, John, for actually getting in community and actually sharing some of those things already. And I think that's the first thing when I talk about and in the book, everybody has their stylistic preferences of how they view things. I think sometimes that's good as long as we don't steer a person away from the core things that they need to know. One of the ways that I conceptualize the work is in 5 steps, particularly of doing exposures. And the very, very first part of that is just in what's called tracking or monitoring. And like we don't change what we don't track. Even it's funny in clinical settings, they'll say, hey, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And the point of that being not that it's supposed to be hidden, the point of it being you need to document anything of importance. And the same is true with, well, life in general. If we value something a lot, it's like SpongeBob, write that down, write that down. If you know the meme, it's important. We just naturally find ourselves writing down things that are really important or wanting to take a picture, get a selfie of something for the record. And so with OCD, I mean, I think the first thing is just that awareness. And the self-awareness starts that, of course. Maybe it comes from the outside where somebody says, what's this? But it won't go anywhere unless if you have that, first of all, individually, which you did. And it takes that courage to be able to share that. So right off the bat, being able to do that in a safe way. And I really want to emphasize that. Actually, this could be its own talk unto itself, but from a faith standpoint, I want to be clear on the positive side that there are tremendous communities that exist that are safe and supportive. There are communities that exist that are not safe and supportive. And so, uh, when thinking of who one shares with, and how to go about that, I actually do detail this in a large section of the book. it's useful to ask a few of those questions. And sometimes it might even be, it's not meant to be shady, but testing out those things like, oh, hey, do you ever struggle with anything like anxiety? Like I do, right? That's anxiety is such a really easy term. And like, oh, no, brother, like if not really, if you have faith, that just goes away. God takes care of that, right? Duly noted. Thanks for your thoughts.
Right.
And on to the next opportunity, right? With that. So I think just that first thing, at least that comes to mind, is the role of that vulnerability, that courage, that strength of showing up and being able uh, to label, identify it within ourselves, but then as soon as we can actually get it out of ourselves too, and share, connect with another person, it's so crucial.
Yeah, I would echo to what John was saying, and it's good to hear that, and for people to kind of have this instruction on how to find out who is safe. Growing up in the church, I grew up in a very religious household in the
Yeah,
South
that's right.
in the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, and having well, first of all, I just wanted to say I had a whole episode because I watched The Exorcist. I thought The Exorcist was a monster. I had no idea it was about demon possession, and I watched it by myself when I was babysitting. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. But I just waited for my bed to shake every night for like 2 months.
Mm,
But growing up, and I had religious scrupulosity as overarching theme, but having sexual orientation OCD, back in the 90s in the South, it would have been looked down upon. I actually having it at that time didn't care. I was like, people can do whatever they want. Even internally, I knew that as a teenager, probably because I just understood struggle anyway, and not being able to talk openly about what you're going through. But that was difficult because it was this, how am I? Well, first of all, my religious scrupulosity told me that I was sinning against God, and that's why he was sending me intrusive thoughts and anxiety. So I really, at some points, it almost felt like it had crossed over into psychosis. I was so
mm, mhm,
feeling this way. But yes, that barrier of fear and judgment
mm,
from the religious standpoint of not knowing how to talk about it, and also knowing if I did share it, the response would be pray more when I was already praying so much because of compulsions. And so that
mm,
may be a good,
mhm,
John, I'm kind of taking over, sorry.
Yeah.
But that may be,
No, you're
sorry about that, but
you're the co-host. You're fine. You're
it's a good
fine.
segue of like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with that. I mean, I was praying sometimes 24/7, and like not even able to sleep at times, with this repetitive prayer, thinking that was the solution when I didn't know how to OCD at that point. But
mm, mhm,
how do you distinguish the two? What is appropriate prayer and what is compulsive praying? And two-part question. And how do you talk to people about how do you help educate people about the difference too? If you
mm,
have a
mhm,
family that keeps saying, well, let's pray more, let's all pray about it. And it's like, no, this is compulsive. What's the
mhm, mhm,
educational piece and what's the distinction?
mhm. Yes, yeah. So maybe two things that I'm hearing. So one is that separation between healthy faith and practice versus OCD compulsions. Yep. And then maybe second of all, is it more the tips for clergy, people in the church, faith leaders, etc. Oh man, y'all are just giving the lob balls of some of my favorite topics. Yeah, so one excellent resource right off the bat, Dr. Ted Witzig, based in Illinois, and he actually, it's in one of his presentations that he has this healthy faith versus scrupulosity. And if you'd like, I can send it as like a show notes, just as just separate. It references him and his references too. It's one of my favorite references of all time. And in essence, it there's several things like in OCD there's a narrow scope is one example. So fear will narrow focus, literally, physiologically. So if I am afraid of something, really afraid, my peripheral vision will literally cut out, and I'll be less aware of those things around me. So John, as he stares me down, he's got this beard and he looks like he could beat me up. Like, just keeping my eyes on him, making sure he doesn't pop through the door here. He said he likes the Dallas Cowboys, so maybe he's in Dallas. He's going to hunt me down, right? I'm not going to be more aware of all of my surroundings and the fact that I've got this interesting little mailer of a Christmas cookie catalog, something here on my desk. Like, I'm not going to be aware of those things. I'm going to be narrowed to a pinpoint. And that's one of the surefire things that shows up versus faith. So, for example, possession, when we take that, the person will be so preoccupied, which I think is another one, the preoccupation with that one thing that other stuff starts to get cut out. So the person's not thinking about, like, okay, starting my day today, do I say a prayer? Do I have a specific practice? How am I walking with others today? How am I serving others, etc.? It's just, oh my goodness, could I be possessed? Is this a thing? What does this look like? So it's very narrow in its scope. Obviously, the severity of that, a person can have all sorts of questions. There's a lot of topics that come up in life in general and spiritually that are massively uncomfortable to think about. Let's just take death as a topic. I mean, that might be the main one. That if we think of something that we probably actually do think about it every single day without realizing how we get in our car, whether we put the seatbelt on, things like that. Well, the intensity is a big part of OCD. So a person won't be able to just think about that in a passing way and move on. It's going to really hook on to that. So there's a lot of different ones. Dr. Witzig talks about 10 different ones. But over time, there's a flavor to these things, and I see it almost like a recipe. My friend and colleague, Dr. Reverend Katie O'Dunn, talks about the icky yucky flavors of ice cream. Now, never had icky yucky ice cream, but yeah, I could imagine if it were, made from uh, chicken dung or whatever else. Like, she talks about these awful flavors of ice cream. That OCD is just like this nasty ice cream. That there's different flavors. Yeah, so it's just going to show up different ways, but have this distinctive characteristic of it is a thing. It's fear-based. It's narrowing. It starts to cut out other practices and emphases. And so these are some of the reference points that we can use or begin to notice, even just ask a question like, does this actually lead towards joy? Is this something that I'm finding hope in, hope, joy, love, etc.? Or is this something more constricting that it's spiraling downwards and gets ever more narrow with more and more doubts and fears? Because that is actually the opposite of what's going to happen if a person gets deeper into purpose and meaning and love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Fill in the blank.
Confession was like another one that I'm thinking of because with the
Mm,
prayer,
yeah, yeah.
especially going to like a Catholic school, as a kid, I did elementary school and Catholic school as well. And this idea of like having to go to confession and like whereas
Hmm.
I would see my parents and my grandparents go every once in a while. It
Hmm.
was like
Hmm.
I felt almost like this need of like anytime I saw that the priest is in, like we
Yes,
gotta go
yeah.
confess, like
Yeah, the sign
I
goes
lied
up.
to my parents. The sign is like, oh, from 2 p.m. to 4 the priest is in, and it's like, oh shit, I better get in there. Better get in there,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
um and then even that was kind of like probably not as helpful for me because it's like, once you finish confession, what are you told to do? Go say 10 Hail Marys, like five Our Fathers, and like then you get into this prayer cycle. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing if you recognize that, like, okay, this is what the religion says, and like I'm gonna go say those prayers and that's it, like that's great.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
the problem is when you start getting into that, hours of prayer and
Hmm.
Maybe I didn't do it right.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was another one where I would like leave church, and if I didn't do the full sign of the cross, Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I had this fear that like any thought I had in that time would
Mm.
come true, or it would.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and instead of actually getting relief, and in all fairness, a lot of people, even outside of OCD, will struggle with the
so
concept of
yeah, yeah,
depression.
yeah.
But at the same time, like it's meant to at its heart uh, be a practice that brings freedom and
Right.
joy, which it doesn't. It's I think of, and I specifically watched when I was in Chicago, Blues Brothers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's
Yep.
such a great
Yep.
representation of like the guilt and fear side
Mhm.
of I'm gonna get Elwood's gonna get slapped on the wrist, with and then there's this creepy nun that is basically just hunting him down until he does it exactly right. And a lot of people just feel this constant pressure and immense fear with that versus that actually being a gracious thing, a freeing thing, like, oh, I am so glad that I got this off my chest. Instead, it's like more on the chest as the person walks away.
I did want to go back. I had a quick question based on something you said, and you might not have the advice for this, or you might, and feel comfortable talking about it. But one of the things that I kind of thought was interesting is when we were talking about, finding that safe space of like opening up about mental health and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, and we heard Chrissy, talking about her experience growing up with faith. How do you, how does somebody who maybe just grew up in a certain faith and like have that one like track mind of like this is how all faiths are, how do they distinguish between like a safe space versus something that might be detrimental to their mental health and mental
Mm-hmm.
well-being?
Yeah, one it actually comes up quite a bit in the therapy process, and so help a lot of folks with it can be hurt, but it can also be trauma as well. So church hurt or trauma, trauma more distinctively where that person's well-being has taken a huge hit, and so it has created deeper and lasting marks on that person. We're all going to experience hurt in different ways, and a person that mishandles something, and that can be a faith leader if we spend enough time. Of course, we're all humans here, but from the standpoint of finding that safety. I'll have to reference what I wrote in the book because I know that I had a little bit of a bullet point list, but it is uh, y- there are some of those small steps that can be taken. I mean, one is even just having an idea of what does safety look like, and I find that I walk with a lot of folks that just become so desperate for that connection or that hope that even the overshare can happen. This happens sometimes with people's spouses even, and I'm the first that is going to say in my own marriage and life, like absolutely the wording that I use from my Christian background is oneness, like this being one, being joined together. And so I don't want to keep secrets from my spouse. Uh, and people will show up in therapy, though, oftentimes with marriages, with church relationships that are at a negative spot. And just because there is an ideal doesn't mean that that's the starting point. And I I might argue that that may be one of the most important principles across the board for OCD recovery because when people walk into therapy, when they walk into a church, when they tell a friend, another person, whether they understand or not, I think that more, maybe even more than compulsions themselves, hanging a person up is an unhelpful expectation of what growth looks like and an unhelpful expectation of what the how we get to a more ideal place. And the more and more it's a high control, high demand, it's about power, it's about you must follow this right now, or you must be at a place that you're not or can't be, the more and more that's detrimental. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that we can work with stair stepping that in many ways. So one, that example that I gave a little bit earlier of, hey, do you ever get anxious too? It could be a question, or it could be a little bit of self-disclosure. We do this in a lot of other ways, day to day. If we're meeting somebody new, talking to somebody new, going on a date, that some people aren't so great at this, and they're sharing their whole life story immediately on a first date. Let's just get this over with. But when we think of normal boundaries, it's a boundary issue. I need to determine, is this safe? Is this reasonable? And actually, one of my favorite scriptures on this is it said that Jesus entrusted himself to no man because he knew what was in the heart of man, which is that's a whole topic unto itself. But it's this aspect where, okay, yeah, he wasn't just going to be like, all right, y'all seem pretty cool. You've hung out with me for a few years, and it's like, no, like there was, I would, I don't want to just off the top of my head minimize into this, but I'll call it a healthy skepticism. And so walking in with a healthy dose of good boundaries is essential for healthy relationships, and that involves a certain amount of healthy testing as well.
With the boundaries part of it, part of this series we talked about, with careers, like disclosure and like, with careers, disclosure to HR and whatnot, or
Mm,
like
mhm,
disclosure to your spouse and I guess if you had somebody who does really value faith and they wanted to open up to a clergy member but has that fear of them not understanding, because there is a bunch out there, right? You don't know what each religion,
mhm,
uh how they treat mental health. um I know there's probably a fine line between like the feeling of I need to disclose with OCD,
yeah, yeah.
versus like I want to disclose. uh I guess like how would you initiate that conversation? I don't really know like the setup of people's churches and
Mhm,
religions. Like, would you recommend going to like a priest directly, or would you would you say, maybe just a friend that you go to church with? Like, what have you seen in the past? Have people struggled with opening up to clergy members and
mhm, mhm.
or clergy leaders?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in for one, actually on the clergy side, believe it or not, clergy are the most trusted still to this day out of anyone in society to be shared with first. Confidential, private information. And actually, it's it beats out medical doctors too. And so one thing that I think is important to say is that there really are a lot of positives the way that things are in situations where it can go really, really well and does go really, really well. And there's plenty of folks that I work with, and I love those stories. Plenty that I work with that have really bad stories, and it's gone poorly. And so obviously, some of these questions are about the wisdom and obviously the care, so that hopefully doesn't end in the more negative results. But a pastor, clergy member, uh, they may or may not have received training to be able to know how to ask some of the questions around topics of, let's say, mental health, etc. But I think even just, I mean, one is. uh, there's so many things because it relates to relationships, it relates to a group, but I think some of the basics, besides even just kind of testing the waters a little bit, I think there's some reading the room that can go on as well, like asking about, hey, do y'all have any resources for people that go through addiction, mental health, et cetera? You can even just generalize that even more. So churches, places of worship, they're like, oh, yeah, we don't have much here, but we wish that we did, or we have this list of all these other folks, and when people need counseling, we've got these vetted referrals. Okay, those can be a really, really good sign of all right, these folks are kind of open towards the emotional mental health side of things. Or, oh yeah, we let these AA groups, run on our campus. It's like, okay, there you go. Uh, Most of the time, I think people find out really quickly, and paying attention to that healthy gut. We oftentimes kind of speak of the gut in a negative sense in the OCD world, like, yeah, my gut says to go wash my hands 20 times. Well, yeah, but there's also that other healthy human part of the instinct and intuitions that exist of, yeah, if you go to a place, ask a couple of questions, look around, look at in a bulletin or flyer as far as what they do, how they're involved in the community and so forth. And if the language reads, um, are you struggling with your emotional mental health? Repent, you filthy sinners. Like, okay, you might might look at starting the conversation with someone else first of all. Paying attention, reading the room a little bit, asking a few of those questions. You can even kind of anonymize, an example. Like, oh, I have a friend uh, uh, who struggles with this and kind of test it out, right? What's that, Chrissy?
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. This guy over here, he struggles with that. What would you do?
I know we probably only have about 6, 7 minutes left, but I definitely wanted to ask you this. Just in doing peer support, sometimes I get individuals who are really hesitant to go into treatment. So when someone is struggling with religious scrupulosity or, the fears of eternal damnation, things like, worshiping the devil, things like that, the idea of doing exposure work is, that not only the shame and the guilt that can get in the
Mhm.
way of, being the barriers to treatment, but when someone is hesitant or just absolutely terrified because doing the exposure seemed like it would just further the fears that the OCD is perpetuating. What are
Mhm.
some strategies that you would use? And I'm asking just so people can see that they're not going into therapy and the therapist is going to be like, okay, let's go worship the devil, because that's
Yeah.
what they're scared of, right? Because
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
look at
Hmm.
exposure, it's expose yourself to your fear. So now I have to write a love letter to Satan, or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm. Yeah.
people, because I feel like this is taboo, because
Hmm.
people feel like they're messing with the eternity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's really scary for people. So,
Yeah.
if someone is struggling right now watching this and thinking there's no way I'm going to therapy because of this stuff,
Mm.
what
Hmm.
what could you tell them to help ease that fear?
Yeah. And I love how Chrissy, like your heart goes towards that regularly. Anything that I do with you, you tend to ask like, how do we help that person, who's still suffering? It's just one of my absolute favorite things. Like you're even if you didn't ask those questions, you'd still be just such a awesome advocate and friend. But I just love that how you don't let 20 minutes pass without thinking like how do we help a person with this, which is great. Yeah, so I first of all, let me speak on the clinical side first, because I think that's the most concise way that I can be. If you're doing exposures, exposure is to face the thing you fear, not to do the thing that you fear is the result that you're afraid of. That wasn't quite as clear as in my mind, but it's facing the fear of, right? It's not doing the thing. And it gets a little confusing, but all we have to do is contextualize this. There, uh, with a person with contamination OCD needs to face the fear of getting COVID, getting sick, getting AIDS, fill in the blank, by doing the thing that they would otherwise have a reason to do, such as grab the door handle, such as put on their shoes, such as put the shoes away, don't wash, fill in the blank. And the uh, there often is this difficulty bridging the gap then when thinking of spiritual things, or if we think of blasphemy or possession, etc., that all of a sudden it's switched into the category. It would almost be like asking the person with contamination OCD to go inject themselves with HIV and AIDS, which obviously we're not going to do, right? Uh, so to ask a person who, for instance, is a Christian and worships Jesus, to go and to now write a letter that they worship someone else, that's massively inappropriate. That's wrong. That's not okay to do. And frankly, good clinicians don't do that. There are always wild stories, and I've heard them, and they exist. They're out there. Um, but somebody who's in, we need to vet clinicians as well. I want my clients that I work with to vet me and to ask those questions of like, how would you work with this? How would you work with this? And actually, a lot of times when we're talking about those very taboo, unacceptable thought themes, images or urges that people feel as a part of the intrusion, uh, sometimes that first therapy session, for example, or that first conversation, not even talking about the topic, is literally their first exposure because they know that that's what they would be working towards. And then from there, I actually have clients that I'll use a neutral word association just to reference
Yeah.
what the fear is. So potato or banana, that's not always neutral. Um, let's say potato, uh, to just pick a word to be like, they know, I know that that's a reference to, let's say blasphemy. And so we will actually do exposures like looking at the word potato, writing out potato, just in the same way we would go a little bit further in any other category. And then at some point, once they've learned to not compulse, to be able to sit with that and learn what it looks like to be present or to practice that just presence with their distress, getting better and better at that. Okay, so now maybe we introduce one word and maybe it's just blasphemous is the word. And we sit with that with like an exposure script. Never does that person need to do something that is distinctly violating their faith. The same is true with sexual intrusions. The same is true. Fill in the blank. Like we're not going to tell people to go out and do illegal things and go out and do, fill in the blank. So it is always exposure to the fear of that thing. We just have to contextualize it for these things that seem so scary. And I wanted to make sure to say too, for clergy, faith leaders, etc. There's a lot of ways. Actually, we just talked about this at the online OCD conference and then the Faith and OCD conference a couple weeks ago. Uh, but the the question is the first and most powerful tool. Hey, I see you looked pretty distressed with this. You doing okay? What was that like for you? Hey, when we talked about this sermon, when we had this message, or when you turn white as a ghost, may ask what's going on. And hey, I noticed that most people walked away and they might have been challenged, but kind of encouraged. You're coming back with the same questions. Does that ever loop for you? Do you ever have obsessive? So the power of the question is really, really key with that. So anyway, I'll slow down.
And I also really loved like the what you said about feeling it out. Like just like
Mhm.
going in and just do you have resources on mental health? I think that's huge because
Mhm.
yeah, I think that would just make more people feel comfortable
Mhm.
in, you know, going to somebody. But we will wrap up because I know we have some other things that we have to do. But thank you for being here. And yeah, there could be tons of tons of questions that we have, maybe for
Yeah.
another time.
Yeah,
Um,
happy to do it.
Yeah,
but
thank
yeah,
you so much, Justin. It's always a pleasure. And we are so lucky to have you as a partner and a friend to OCD Game Changers. And personally, I'm lucky to have you as a colleague and a friend as well.
Yeah, same here. That's one of the coolest things. And literally from the standpoint of the work that I do, at one point I was drawing up this little map of, okay, like what am I doing from a work standpoint? Like what's most important? And I'd come up with a few arms to the work that I do. And this is the vulnerable part because it sounds weak to my brain initially, but I know it's not. So I press into it. I literally wrote down friends. I want friends. And it may sound weird to say from a business plan standpoint but I love that at every turn. Like I love that I get to meet you today, John, and Chrissy, that we've had this friendship, for like maybe a decade at this point. Yeah, and that's I want to encourage any listener today that's part of what's in store. One of the parts of recovery is friends along the way, which is pretty special. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being such a compassionate leader for faith,
Mm,
with
mm,
individuals who are struggling with this type of OCD and just in general. I mean, really, you
thanks.
were someone to be admired. I hope you will accept
Thanks, Chrissy.
that compliment.
Yeah.
We really, really appreciate you.
No, thank you. That means the world. Thank you.
And John, thank you for putting this series together and being here in all of these interviews. You'd
Yeah.
imagine looking forward to doing
Hey,
more of
thank
this.
you. Yeah, thank you for having me. And my hands are less sweaty after these interviews. They just get less sweaty, like going on. I think the first one, like
Hmm.
people are probably looking at me like, who the hell is this guy? Like he's so nervous, you know. But
Yeah,
Back
me
yeah,
too early
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully the sweat was not visible. But just know that my heart was beating 100 times a minute compared to today, where it just felt a little bit more natural. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for letting me use this platform. And tomorrow's Giving Tuesday. Don't forget.
Yes. Yes. We'll be
We
doing
will be
Giving Tuesday on Instagram tomorrow. Join us. We're going to be raising funds for next year's events all around the world in several different countries. Look at there we go. Giving Tuesday. Throw
yeah,
it at us.
yeah.
So join us on Instagram. Feel free to donate as we're heading into the end of the year. And every single penny that you donate to Game Changers goes towards these events. We have an all volunteer board, and we just have been able to touch people's lives across the world. If you want to donate and you cannot attend the Giving Tuesday on Instagram, check us out at Game Changers, OCDGameChangers.com. We accept donations. And again, every single penny helps. And people are so appreciative when we are able to visit their country and their state and be able to share this lived experience. So thank you for joining us for the series. We will let you know when our next series is. Justin, again, thank you for being here. And
Thanks
we
for
will
having me.
see you at our next, whatever series we're doing. John will come up with that by the end of the year. Bye, everyone.
Bye.